topic is, or the point being, the human mind is highly influenceable. The human mind is highly influenceable. And, of course, this has been known for many years in the context of our pandemic and various upheavals throughout the world and in the States. Of course, we've seen how belief systems have been rigidly held and how that has created political divisions around handling the pandemic, our safety, our health. So that's one aspect, sort of the socio-cultural, political aspect. Also, this influenceability is reflected in the power of the placebo effect. I think all of you are familiar with the placebo effect. In science, the researchers give, as an example, the patient a sugar pill, and the patient might believe that the sugar pill is, or possibly is, an antidepressant. And that belief, what the patient brings to the process, actually can elevate the mood. And now we know that some very good research has suggested that much of the effect for some people with some antidepressants, much of the positive effect is the placebo response. Here's a little placebo factoid. I think some of you might know. Do you know what the word placebo means? It translates, I believe, from the Greek, I shall please. I shall please. And so this is a very pleasing expectation that can even influence, of course, neurochemistry. For those of you who want to go deeper into the placebo response, there are a lot of good books out there. One highly readable book, you don't have to be a scientist or a clinician to really appreciate this book. It's called Suggestible You, Suggestible You. The author's name escapes me at this time, but I believe he was hired or contracted by National Geographic, very good science writer who reviewed much of the research, met many of the leading scientists in the placebo field. And it's quite an engaging and enjoyable book to read, not dry at all. For example, I believe he lives in Mexico, and he purposefully consulted with a Mexican shaman healer and asked that healer to put a curse on them to see how that would affect them. So he's pretty courageous. Of course, we also know that social media conditions us. We know that our cultural milieu conditions us. Look at the culture of consumerism that tells us more is better. And even if we're a so-called enlightened, very aware consumer, we have been influenced by images that aren't necessarily received in a conscious way. And of course, we've been conditioned by our family. When we see reality from the filter of our thoughts, we can think of that as cognitive fusion, essentially being held by our thoughts, in a sense, held hostage by our thoughts. Cognitive fusion. The opposite of that is cognitive diffusion, creating space from the thoughts so that rather than seeing reality from our thoughts, we're able to see clearly through our thoughts so that we don't have to change them to be at peace. We just have to see thoughts for what they are, not an ironclad representation of reality. And so, as we've talked about in the past, thoughts are essentially empty, the result of many conditions. And emptiness means that they are not some monolithic object of truth. with a capital T. Our thoughts and beliefs are shaped by environmental influences, including our internal emotional environment. In fact, used to be the framing was that our emotional experience is a byproduct of what we think and believe. And that certainly may be true in many cases. But the reverse is also true. That is, our emotional brain may predispose us for certain kinds of thoughts. We see this in meditation. If we engage in a meditation practice when we're already feeling maybe insecure or worried in our body, let's say, without a formed thought, we may start focusing on thoughts and beliefs, so-called beliefs, that are in alignment with how we feel through our body. And so a fearful or angry body is a fertile ground for fearful or angry thoughts, for example. And I believe neuroscience would support that. So, we're vulnerable to these influences of beliefs and thoughts. For one, they decrease ambiguity. When we can hold on to a certain thought, even when the thought is distorted, there's a certain amount of consistency and coherence that happens. And without that, we move into maybe what Alan Watts might call the wisdom of insecurity. And I recently came across this Alan Watts quote. He says, the more we try to live in the world of words, the more we feel isolated and alone, the more all the joy and liveliness of things is exchanged for mere certainty and security. On the other hand, the more we are forced to admit that we actually live in the real world, the more we feel ignorant, uncertain, and insecure about everything. And that is Alan Watts from his book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, subtitled A Message for an Age of Anxiety. And that was written probably 50 years ago. Yeah. I once saw a bumper sticker that really caught my eye. It said something to the effect that the universe rearranges itself to conform to your beliefs. The universe rearranges itself to conform to your beliefs. Because, of course, we often view the world, the universe, so to speak, through the filter of our beliefs. And what's out there often confirms our beliefs. We call that confirmation bias often. We see that in social media, where people are picking and choosing, not just members of the general public who haven't been trained in scientific methodology. We see this by very esteemed members of various professions in the science, picking and choosing research findings to conform to their own biases about the best diet, the best lifestyle, the best way to live, So we have to be careful, So what skillfulness can we bring to this human tendency to fix ourselves upon beliefs and solidify them? Well, of course, meditation and practicing mindfulness can really help to unhinge us from regarding beliefs and thoughts as solid. The word metacognition comes to mind. I believe I've mentioned that several times here. The idea to bring awareness to your own thinking process so that you're not swept along by the thought. You're able to see it in a more objective way. Disidentifying with the narrative, the story that tells you who you are and rigidly tells you what reality or truth is. Disidentify. And some steps around disidentification include, act like a scientist in your experience of the world. That is, use the empirical method, observation, that tells you or that allows you to stay open to the facts and even refute your own beliefs. When you start refuting your own beliefs in an open, engaged way, that's a sign that you're becoming unhinged in a positive way from holding on to your thoughts so tightly. And be aware of confirmation bias, the tendency to look for evidence out in the world and in your relationships that confirm what you already believe, In the field of family and marital social relations, John Gottman, the psychologist John Gottman, has a concept called negative sentiment override. Negative sentiment override. And that is when couples are stressed, they are likely to perceive any action or word as a negative action in the other. So we can be primed for negativity and look for it. And that can confirm our biases in our closest relations, in all relationships. So instead of buying a thought, frame your thought as having a thought rather than being a thought. For example, if I say I am worthless, reframe it as having a thought that I am worthless, or a thought is visiting me that I am worthless. That's different than the identity of I am. So we want to create space from the narrative, the stories, and we want to hold all beliefs lightly, or at least play with the idea. I'm not telling you what you want, but play with the idea or the process of holding all beliefs lightly, especially the beliefs that tend to amplify, support, bolster any suffering, distress, disconnection. Now, beliefs can be very beautiful. And beliefs, sometimes I believe that human beings hold on to beliefs because they connect us. They give us a sense of belonging and connection. And so look at that dynamic. Do your beliefs and thoughts about yourself and others create a web of connection for you, or do they separate you? And that's not necessarily, aiming at the truth in an absolute way, but rather just looking at the function of thoughts and beliefs. And so I'll end with a couple stories, a brief poem, and also a story. I want to first give you a precept from the Order of Interbeing, which is Zen Master's Thich Nhat Hanh's Zen order. He has 14 precepts, but I'll just give you the first. And I really love this precept. When I was studying formally in that order, I really loved this precept. It helped me to feel connected and open. And it says this: do not be idolatrous about or bound to any doctrine, ideology, or theory. Even Buddhist ones. Buddhist systems of thought are guiding means. They are not absolute truths. I fell in love with that statement when I first encountered it. And then an old Zen story, at least 1,000 years old, about Hogen, Hogen. I have to read this story. I haven't committed it to memory. So Hogen, a Chinese Zen teacher, lived alone in a small temple in the country. One day, 4 traveling monks appeared and asked if they might make a fire in his yard to warm themselves. While they were building the fire, Hogen heard them arguing about subjectivity and objectivity. He joined them and said, "There is a big stone. Do you consider it to be inside or outside of your mind? There is a big stone. Do you consider there is a big stone?" He's pointing at the big stone. "Do you consider it to be inside or outside your mind?" So one of the monks replied, From the Buddhist viewpoint, everything is an objectification of mind. So I would say that the stone is inside my mind. Your head must feel very heavy, said Hogan, if you are carrying around a stone like that in your mind. So that's one old Zen story from the wonderful book, Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, classic. And then for the Spanish speakers out there, a very brief verse by the poet Antonio Machado. I'll say it in Spanish first and then in English. En mi soledad he visto cosas muy claras que no son verdad. I'll say it again. En mi soledad he visto cosas muy claras que no son verdad. In my solitude, I have seen things very clearly that were not true. In my solitude, I have seen things very clearly that were not true.